This podcast is for anyone who has ever felt stuck, whether it's a major life transition, a dark night of the soul, or just staying small out of fear. If you've ever struggled to move forward, if you're repeating unhealthy patterns in relationships, or you have a black belt in beating yourself up, you were meant for more, and this podcast is for you. We'll get real, we'll get vulnerable, we'll probably cuss a little bit, and we'll get to the root of it all, your self-worth. With every step, you'll find the courage to rise. Welcome to this week's episode of the Courage to Rise podcast. Today, I want to talk about the concept of compassion for self, also known as self-compassion. And self-compassion is a key element of self-love. It is truly a form of love for self. And it's one that we often forget, particularly when we are on, I want to find a different phrase than healing journey. However, there's a journey of evolution that we go on. Many people go on, not everyone, but if you're listening to my podcast, congratulations, you're on that journey. We go on a journey of really self-discovery. And in that journey of self-discovery, it's not that yourself is necessarily lost. It's simply that you have forgotten. And there is healing along that journey. And so this process of remembering who you really are. And when I say who you really are, I mean at your core essence, soul level, before you started to make unconscious key decisions, when your brain was very malleable up until the age of 7, when you started to make unconscious decisions about who you needed to be or thought you were supposed to be in order to deserve love, before anything happened in your external world that created any kind of internal trauma or any kind of events that created anything within you that then led to certain ways of being, or for you to experience certain things in life that you have now decided you no longer want to experience. And so you are on a journey of rediscovering yourself, self-discovery, rediscovering yourself, remembering who you really are before all of those survival mechanisms kicked in to try to protect you. And that fundamentally is your ego. The ego gets a really bad rap, but the ego is actually a good thing. We just want it to be in balance. And the ego, you might have heard people say, kill your ego. This is not about killing your ego. This is about maturation of your ego, maturing your ego. And in this process of rediscovering yourself, it's unlearning all of those things that we've memorized. And it is one of the keys that I tell all of my clients, and I know this because it was what I had to learn myself, is compassion for self. A metric fuck ton of compassion for yourself wherever you are on your journey. Because many times we find it easier to have compassion for others, but we have different rules for ourselves. We hold ourselves to a higher standard. I used to joke, well, because I have to joke about things, but I used to joke that I had a black belt in beating myself up. And I'm very proud to say that I have proudly relinquished that black belt because A, it's not a good workout, doesn't burn any calories, and it really doesn't help you on your journey. And if you catch yourself in a cycle where you are beating yourself up about something, then that's okay. Don't allow that to then create another cycle where you're like, oh God, I'm beating myself up and I'm supposed to stop that, but I say that because I used to do that to myself too. But what it is simply catching yourself when you are truly being abusive to yourself. And good gut check questions are, would I speak to my beloved child, my beloved pet, my beloved partner, my beloved friend, my beloved parent? Would I speak to someone I deeply love and care for in this way? And the answer is almost always no. But we will, without realizing it, be terribly abusive to ourselves and have terribly high standards for ourselves. And so the journey of evolution of self necessitates truly compassion for the journey. Because I see this all the time in my clients, and I have certainly experienced it in my own life, is we will loop back through things that we thought maybe, well, I thought I was over this. My coach, my mentor, my therapist, my friend told me X, Y, Z, and so I should know better. And that becomes a form of shame, frustration, heaviness, and ultimately a complete lack of compassion for self on the journey. Because we as humans, part of the human condition is we are literally wired to forget. And when I say that, I mean it's the same thing that, maybe you've experienced this, you've had a really profound awareness, or you've read a book, or you've had a coaching session, or something has catalyzed an awareness in you about something that you're working to shift, a pattern that you're working to shift. And then you find yourself realizing that you're looping back into that pattern again. And instead of beating yourself up for it or harshing on yourself and feeling frustrated about, well, why haven't I come farther? Why haven't I done more? Why am I not farther on this journey? Just allowing yourself to notice, oh, wait a minute, this is just that pattern that I had that I've repeated sometimes. It's okay. It's kind of like you fall off the bicycle, you just get right back on. You just fell off the horse, get back on the horse, right? Whatever it is, it's kind of like that saying, you fall down 7 times, you get up 8, because that is the process that we go through on any kind of healing journey, any kind of journey of self-discovery, anything that we're shifting and changing within ourselves, not because we're broken or we need to be fixed, but simply because it's an act of self-love to help to navigate yourself through things that would have ordinarily created a lot of tension and heaviness and negativity and strife and survival emotions within you. And you love yourself so much, and you're continually learning to love yourself more and more, that you are making the choice to navigate your way out of a pattern that you no longer want to repeat. And so when you find yourself repeating that pattern, instead of beating yourself up, you can just stop and notice. Because remember, I always say awareness is first. If you're not aware you're doing it, how can you change it? And you just become aware, oh, wait a minute, I've recognized this pattern. Every time, a big one is in relationships, because relationships bring up a lot of our shit. And this is an opportunity because it's showing you something about yourself. So you're repeating a pattern in dating. And instead of beating yourself up for repeating this particular pattern, you just stop and you go, wait a minute, I recognize this. This is a pattern that I've repeated for a long time, and I've decided that I would like to shift this because it no longer feels good for me to continue this. So the first step is I just became aware that I was having some old thoughts that were leading me to continue to feel some old emotions I don't want to feel anymore. And I have made the conscious decision that I'm electing to shift out of this and choose something new for myself, because that's how much I love myself. And of course, I'm going to forget from time to time. I cannot tell you how many times my own mentors have had to tell me the same thing 500 times. This is why in the coaching, personal development space, really in anything, but because that's the space that I largely operate in, many people are saying many of the same things, but you may hear something that I say that might not be all that different than what somebody else has said, but you hear it in a slightly different way, or you resonate with my energy a little bit differently, or you hear the same thing I've said from somebody else, and for whatever reason, it's like it finally clicks and it finally goes in. But that's why people, sometimes we have to hear things 500 times in 500 different ways, or 500 times in the same way, before we actually go, oh, okay, I get it. So it's okay. It's like Groundhog's Day sometimes. And it's okay that it's like Groundhog Day, because our brains are actually wired to forget. And so it takes conscious intention to shift so that we begin to repattern a new way of being. And in that process, you can either slow that process down or you can accelerate that process. And the difference maker is how you are responding to yourself. If you are feeling heavy shame, shame will keep you in a personal spiral. It will keep you weighed down. Frustration is really an extension of anger and shame, right? And when it's directed at yourself, it's continuing to keep you in a heavy place, repeating those patterns. And so what you can elect to choose, and it truly is a choice, and it will become easier and easier the more you do it, is when you stop and you go, I'm going to choose compassion for myself right now. What would that look like? And everyone is on a different spectrum of their relationship to this. So wherever you are is absolutely perfect for you, because everyone is in a learning process. Everybody has their own journey that they're on. So it might be quite easy for you to find compassion for yourself, or it might be more challenging because you've been in a process of repairing your own relationship to yourself. But wherever you are in that process, just stop and make a small choice. Maybe it's, I'm just not going to beat myself up about this. I'm just going to allow it to be okay. I haven't quite turned down all those negative voices in my head, but I'm just going to allow it to be okay. And I say this to clients all the time, and I'm always careful to preface it by saying I am not discounting your feelings or your emotions. But what I'm saying is we're going to use some wording to put this in perspective, which is all that happened was X, Y, and Z. All that happened was you fell back into an old pattern, because what this does is it takes the power away from it. And again, you hear I'm very careful I'm not diminishing their experience, because it's a very important and delicate balance. And I mean, you all know I'm tough love coach, but tough love doesn't mean that you're bypassing or gaslighting or beating the shit out of anybody. What that really means is that you're cutting through the bullshit, because that is actually the most loving thing that we can do. And so in that, it's important to give yourself that same grace, so you're finding the balance of honoring your experience, but then also putting it in the perspective of all that happened, because that takes all the power and heaviness away from it. Because many times we'll create a story, right? Well, if I can't get out of this pattern, then I'm bad, I'm terrible, I'm shameful, I always do this, right? We'll make it permanent, pervasive, and very personal. And when we say, hold on, all that happened was this guy didn't text me back and I fell back into an old pattern. Or this person didn't, I'm using dating examples because it's a lot of people can relate to it, but somebody didn't text me back and I made it mean something about myself. Or I had a really good date, but it didn't pan out and I made it mean something about myself. That's all that happened. So all it's doing is showing you information, right? And so instead of beating ourselves up, which, I mean, if you find yourself doing that and you want to continue to do it, be my guest. You have free will, right? But make it a conscious choice that I'm going to continue to kick my own ass because that's the choice that I'm making. Or you can make a different choice, which is I'm going to choose right now to have compassion for myself, because I am a soul having a human experience, and this human experience can be quite challenging. And so I'm going to be compassionate for myself, because how amazing is it that I am willing to evolve myself, to evolve my human experience, and I'm willing to do these things for myself, because this process, this journey, this remembering of self, it really is about consistently practicing self-compassion, because that is how you can, and this is not why you do it, but it's an effect, an outcome of it, is you really can quantum leap yourself through things, because it will shorten the time of your journey in the very best way, because you're not spending so much time being pulled down into this hole of beating yourself up and shame and frustration and why am I not farther along. And so when you just have the compassion and the neutrality of, it's okay, I just forgot. And so now I'm going to choose to remember again. And I may forget 499 times, but I'm going to remember 500 times. And the other thing that I want to include in this is I want to introduce this perspective that oftentimes we get locked into feeling like everything is a problem to be fixed. And this happens very easily in any kind of personal development space. Is sometimes we can get into this habit of, it is a little bit of a habit, but it's like, oh, I'm just like one book or one coach away from like being fixed. And I'm a problem to be fixed, or I have this problem, or this is a problem. And it's a delicate balance there because you're really not a problem. None of this is actually a problem. You are really, truly perfect exactly as you are and where you are for this part of your journey. And so this idea sometimes that we're irreparably broken or damaged and that we have to continue to fix ourselves as though we are a problem, all that does really is turn ourselves into a project. And it implies that inherently we are not good enough as we are. And when I say that, it doesn't mean that you don't want to improve on some things, evolve some things, and grow in some ways. It just is honoring wherever you are, even if it is messy as fuck and you are just sitting in the shit of it right now. And you're going, how in the hell can you say that I am just perfect as I am? Look at all this shit. Well, what I'm saying is that where you are sitting in the middle of that shit is perfect in its own way, that you inherently are not less than just because there are things going on around you or even inside you that feel very challenging or difficult or conflicting. Because when we can cut through all of that and go, even if I'm sitting here in the shit and my whole entire life is falling down around me, or I have a challenge with something, a personal challenge that I'm working through internally as part of my journey, right? Because we will notice patterns that we are repeating. Like I said, relationships are a great example, but it applies to other things too, like food. It applies to everything. And you'll catch yourself doing a behavior, going back to a pattern that you don't want, and sometimes we'll fall back into problem thinking. But I want to also introduce this idea that you're not a problem. You're not a project. You are a human being. You're a human being in this world, your soul having a human experience, and you are in the process of maturing your ego. You are in the process of noticing and evolving patterns that don't serve you anymore, that at some point arrive to help you in some way. Right? Even the things that don't bring about good outcomes in our life had some kind of well-intended meaning when it set out, right? It's just the outcome of it is not something that we want anymore. And so when you start to look at things through that lens, you really do see and begin to grasp more of the concept of compassion for self, because our systems are infinitely intelligent. It's always trying to protect you from something. And sometimes and that is really ultimately our ego. Right? Your ego is what is biologically keeping you alive. And that will turn into, you see people all the time, that it turns into some really negative outcomes in their life for themselves and for other people many times. And we're seeing a lot of that on a larger scale that I don't want to go into right now on this podcast, but we have some very rampant, immature egos that are running roughshod like a bull in a china shop through many of our lives. Anyway, I digress. Egos. And so your ego is there to protect you. And so when you find yourself, there's a pattern you've been repeating, there's something you want to shift, sometimes it can be helpful to, if you want to, you certainly don't have to do this to move through it, to ask the question of, what might this have been trying to protect me from? And you might be very surprised by what you find on the other side of it, but ultimately, it is truly connecting yourself to compassion for your own journey. And you can play with different ways to do that. There's not ever any one way to do any of this. There's not one perfect healing journey. There's not one perfect way to reconnect to self-love or self-compassion or any of those things. There are a million different ways to reach the same outcome And part of that is your exploration process, right? With your discernment along for the ride, because that's important. But allowing yourself to explore what it would be like to insert compassion for self first and foremost in your healing journey, in your self-remembering journey, right? Because what we're really doing as this soul in this human experience is you're remembering who you really are. And that takes clearing away the mud, unmemorizing all those patterns and those neural networks that have gotten baked into your system through repetition, right? Unmemorizing who you thought you were, challenging your own beliefs, because we will form these beliefs. You might have heard them called limiting beliefs, but we will form these beliefs about ourselves and about our lives, and then we will live from the framework of those beliefs. And if one of those beliefs is, I am a failure, I am, shameful, I can never do anything right, it's all, whatever your particular brand of asshole belief in your head. And so starting to shift that and realize you don't actually have to live through that anymore unless you just choose to. And I didn't say it's going to go away and dissolve tomorrow, but I said you having the awareness of it and having compassion for yourself, which can look like, okay, I recognize and I've become aware that there's a certain pattern of thinking, feeling, or being in my life that I have now noticed, and I've noticed that I don't really like the outcome of it. I either don't like the way it makes me feel, I don't like the way it impacts my body, I don't like the way it impacts people around me or my relationships, and I don't like how I feel inside when I do this. Okay, so much love for self in that. Look at that amazing awareness that you have. And so then the next step on this compassionate journey is, now I am undertaking this journey to lovingly release this. And I will lovingly release it as many times as I need to, over and over and over again. And I will remind myself of what I have learned to be true, or I will remind myself of what it is that I'm practicing, memorizing and replacing that with. I will remind myself of this amazing insight that I had. I will put it on a Post-it note. I will put it on my phone. Every time I forget, because you will forget, I will choose to remember. Compassion for self is really saying, it's okay, baby. You're going to fall down. You're going to make mistakes. Perfection is not a thing. Perfect is bullshit. It's about getting up that next time. So if you find yourself beating yourself up, being frustrated with yourself, falling down that shame spiral, feeling heavy embarrassment or guilt or any of those emotions about where you are not, or where you thought you should have been, or you shouldn't be repeating this, any of those shoulds and supposed tos, that is your immediate sign to wrap yourself in compassion. Because self-compassion is truly self-love. And that step alone as part of your toolkit for your journey will be a game changer. And like I said, it may, you may be somewhere on the spectrum. It may be quite easy for you. It may feel quite challenging. Just because something feels challenging to us doesn't mean that we can't do it. All it means is that we're unskilled at it. It just means you haven't done it a lot. So it's going to feel harder, and it's going to feel weird, and it's going to feel uncomfortable. But guess how you get better at something is you continue to do it and you continue to practice it. And now you're bringing conscious awareness to practicing self-compassion, because that, as I said, that is a practice, and that does become a skill. And I can promise you, as someone who quite literally had a black belt in beating herself up, it is truly possible to shift it. Because if I can shift it, and I have, anybody can shift it. Nobody ever kicked my own ass harder than I did. It was not possible. And that's also how I know this is how we navigate ourselves through anything. Anytime you have any kind of emotion or heaviness, or you just have a mood, or you're hormonal, it's having compassion for self is one of the key elements to it, right? There are other things that I won't go into right now because I really want to focus on the self-compassion piece, but it's just, hey, you're having a day. Congratulations, you're human. Congratulations, you have emotions. Congratulations, you have hormones, right? And being compassionate for yourself on the journey means you don't know everything. You know you're going to make a mistake. You know you're going to fuck up. And you're going to learn from it, and you're going to get right back up again. And none of those things say anything about you, because you, as the essence that is you in this human experience, you are divine. You are perfect as you are, as your 1 in 8 billion soul. You are unique as that 1 in 8 billion soul. And you are simply on the journey that you have elected to go on, to remember that about yourself, to remember who you really are. And who you really are at your core is love. So it's the process of remembering, and self-compassion is a key element for that journey. It is key to put in your toolkit, in your backpack for your journey. Sparkle on, my loves. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Courage to Rise podcast. Visit my website, couragetorise.com, for more information on one-on-one coaching, group coaching programs, and other upcoming events. Remember, life's too short not to sparkle. Sparkle on.